He thought the spotlight belonged to him, until it exposed the one person he had erased. The stage shimmered under layers of gold and glass, a cathedral of light built to worship success. And tonight, Nathaniel Brooks stood at its center like a man who believed he had written the ending to his own story. Applause rolled through the grand ballroom in steady waves, polite at first, then swelling into something louder, something reverent, as he lifted his hand in acknowledgement, his cufflinks catching the chandelier light in brief, blinding flashes. Beside him, draped in a sculpted ivory gown that seemed designed more for display than comfort, his new wife smiled with the kind of practiced perfection that belonged on magazine covers, not in real life, her hand resting lightly on his arm, as if she had always been there, as if the past had never existed. From the back of the room, half-shadowed by towering floral arrangements and the quiet movement of servers carrying crystal flutes of champagne, Evelyn Carter watched without moving, her posture still, her expression unreadable, a woman mistaken for part of the background simply because she allowed herself to be. The air carried the scent of polished marble and expensive perfume, layered over the low hum of wealth and conversation, and yet all of it felt distant to her, like she was listening through glass, like the entire evening had been constructed for someone else's reality. 5 years ago, Nathaniel's voice rang out, smooth and controlled, amplified just enough to feel intimate. This company was nothing more than an idea that required vision, sacrifice, and the courage to walk away from anything that held it back. A ripple of approving laughter moved through the crowd, subtle, knowing, and Evelyn felt it land somewhere deep but familiar, not sharp anymore, just an echo of something that used to hurt. Held it back. The words lingered, carefully chosen, sanitized, rewritten. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. Around her, a cluster of former colleagues, people who once sat at the same table, who once called her name like it mattered, leaned closer to one another, whispering just loud enough to be heard if anyone cared to listen. That's her, isn't it? I thought she moved away. She looks different. Different meant smaller, quieter, easier to dismiss. Evelyn let their voices pass through her like background noise, the same way she had learned to let Nathaniel's words pass through her years ago, back when they were spoken in private, softened by a smile that made them seem like concern instead of correction. On stage, he turned slightly, guiding his wife forward with a gentle pressure of his hand, presenting her not just as a partner, but as a symbol, an upgrade, a statement. And none of this, he continued, his tone warming, would have been possible without the right person beside me. Someone who understands what it means to move forward, not stay stuck in the past. The audience responded exactly as expected. More applause, a few approving nods, the quiet satisfaction of a narrative that made sense, that fit neatly into the world they believed in. Evelyn felt her heartbeat, slow and steady, not racing, not breaking, just there, anchoring her in the moment. He was still performing, still rewriting, still certain. And yet she didn't step away, didn't turn toward the exit, didn't shrink into the shadows the way they all expected her to. She stayed exactly where she was, her gaze fixed on the stage, on the man who believed he owned everything he stood on, her silence not empty but deliberate, like a pause waiting for its cue. Because the truth wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. And tonight, for the first time, it wasn't going to stay hidden. The applause lingered longer than it should have, stretching into something almost artificial, as if the room itself was trying to convince everyone that what they were witnessing was complete, unquestionable, final. Evelyn Carter remained where she was, her fingers lightly brushing the stem of an untouched glass of champagne, the cool surface grounding her in a way the rest of the evening could not. She could feel the subtle shifts around her, the way people angled their bodies just slightly to get a better look at the stage, the way conversations bent and curved toward Nathaniel Brooks as though pulled by gravity. He had always been good at that, at becoming the center of any room, at making everything orbit him without ever appearing to demand it. It used to impress her. It used to feel like safety. Now it felt like theater. On stage, he began to pace slowly, each step measured, deliberate, the rhythm of a man who knew exactly how long to hold. A pause before filling it with his voice. Success, he said, letting the word settle, is not just about building something. It is about knowing when to let go of what no longer serves you. Another ripple moved through the audience, softer this time, more contemplative, as if they were being invited into something deeper, something personal. Evelyn's gaze did not waver, but inside, something old shifted, not painfully, not sharply, just enough to remind her of the version of herself who had once stood beside him, believing those same words meant something else entirely. She remembered the early days, before the glass towers and polished stages, when success had been a sketch on a whiteboard in a cramped office that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and ambition. Back then, Nathaniel had not spoken in performances. He had spoken in fragments, in late-night ideas that tumbled over each other, in quiet moments where doubt crept in and he let her see it. She had been there for all of it, not as an accessory, but as a builder, someone who stayed long after the lights went out, someone who knew where the numbers did not add up and where the vision needed to be sharpened. But that version of the story had no place here. Not in this room. Not in this script. A server passed by, offering a tray of fresh drinks, and for a moment, the scent of citrus and chilled glass cut through the heavier air. Evelyn declined with a small shake of her head, her attention pulled back to the stage as Nathaniel gestured toward a massive screen behind him. Images began to flicker across it, carefully curated snapshots of growth, expansion, recognition, each one telling a story that felt seamless, effortless, inevitable. There was no trace of the uncertainty that had once defined those early years, no hint of the quiet negotiations, the risks taken behind closed doors, the signatures that had shaped everything before it became visible. The crowd leaned in, drawn to the narrative, to the clarity of it, to the comfort of a success story that did not ask too many questions. Near the front, someone laughed softly, impressed, and another voice followed. He really built all of this on his own. The words hung in the air for a fraction of a second, unnoticed by most, but not by Evelyn. She felt them land, not as a wound, but as confirmation, a final piece of a puzzle that had already been solved. On stage, Nathaniel paused again, his expression shifting into something almost reflective, as if he were about to offer a glimpse behind the curtain, just enough to feel authentic without ever giving anything away. There are people, he continued, his tone lowering, who come into your life for a season. They play their part, and then they fade, because they were never meant to go the distance. A few heads turned instinctively, subtle, quick, searching, and for the briefest moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Evelyn did not move. She did not react. She simply stood there, exactly as she was, her presence quiet but undeniable, like a truth that did not need to announce itself to be real. Because while he was still speaking, still shaping the narrative in real time, she already knew something he did not. The story he was telling was almost perfect. Almost. And sometimes, almost was the most dangerous place to stand. The words settled over the room like a carefully placed veil, soft enough to feel natural, deliberate enough to obscure what lay beneath, and Evelyn Carter could almost trace the exact moment when the narrative shifted from memory into fiction. She had seen him do it before, not on a stage this grand, not under lights this precise, but in quieter rooms where fewer people were watching and the stakes felt just as high. Nathaniel Brooks had always known how to adjust a story without appearing to change it, how to remove a piece without leaving an obvious gap. The audience responded exactly as expected, their expressions reflecting understanding, agreement, even admiration, because the version of events he offered them was simple, clean, and most importantly, complete in a way that did not invite questions. But Evelyn knew better. She knew that nothing about those early years had been simple, and nothing about what they built had ever belonged to one person alone. Her gaze drifted, not away from him, but through him, past the performance and into something older, quieter, and far more real. She remembered the contracts spread across a narrow desk, the late evenings measured not in hours but in decisions, the way numbers could tell a story just as clearly as words if you knew how to read them. She had known how to read them. She had known where the risk lived, where the leverage hid, where a signature carried more weight than a speech ever could. And she remembered the day that understanding became invisible. It had not happened all at once. There had been no dramatic confrontation, no moment where everything fractured in plain sight. Instead, it had been a gradual shift, a series of small adjustments that seemed reasonable on their own, practical even, until they formed a pattern that could not be ignored. Meetings she was no longer invited to, decisions presented as already finalized, documents that arrived for her review instead of her input. Each change had been explained, softened, justified in the language of growth and efficiency, until the role she once held began to feel like something she had imagined rather than something she had built. On stage, Nathaniel gestured again toward the screen, his confidence unwavering, his voice steady, as if the foundation beneath him had always been this solid, this certain. The images continued to move, faster now, charting expansion across cities and markets, each milestone framed as a personal victory, each success anchored to his name alone. A man near Evelyn leaned slightly toward his companion and murmured, "That kind of vision, you cannot teach that." The reply came quickly, almost automatic. "That is why he is where he is." Evelyn let the exchange pass without acknowledgement, but something inside her aligned, quiet and precise, like a final piece settling into place. Vision, ownership, credit, words that sounded interchangeable to those who had never had to separate them. She knew the difference. She had lived inside that difference long enough to recognize it, even when it was dressed in applause and polished into something else. A subtle shift occurred near the stage, almost imperceptible, a movement of staff, a change in timing, the kind of detail most people would overlook entirely. But Evelyn noticed. She had always noticed the things that happened just outside the main performance, the moments where the real structure revealed itself if you knew where to look. Nathaniel paused again, drawing the room back to him, preparing, it seemed, for something larger, something final, and the anticipation in the air tightened, expectant, ready to receive whatever came next. Evelyn's fingers stilled against the glass she still had not touched, her posture unchanged, her expression calm. But beneath that stillness was something steady and unshakable. He believed the story had already been told. He believed the ending was already his. And for the first time that night, as the light shifted ever so slightly across the stage, Evelyn Carter allowed herself the smallest, almost imperceptible breath of certainty. Because the truth was not waiting to be discovered. It was waiting to be acknowledged. The room leaned forward as if pulled by an invisible thread, anticipation tightening the air into something almost tangible, and Nathaniel Brooks stood at the center of it all with the quiet confidence of a man who believed he controlled not just the present, but the narrative that defined it. He let the silence stretch just long enough to feel intentional before offering a small, knowing smile, the kind that suggested there was more to come, something bigger, something worthy of the stage he had built for himself. Evelyn Carter watched him without blinking. Her focus sharpened not on what he was saying, but on the rhythm beneath it, the subtle cadence of a performance nearing its peak. She had seen this rhythm before, in boardrooms and strategy sessions, in moments where timing mattered more than truth, where perception was shaped long before facts were revealed. Tonight, Nathaniel continued, his voice carrying easily across the room, is not just about celebrating where we have been. It is about unveiling where we are going next. A soft murmur moved through the audience, curiosity mixing with expectation, and behind him, the massive screen shifted again, fading from past achievements into a sleek, minimalist graphic that hinted at something new, something undisclosed. The lighting adjusted almost imperceptibly, dimming just enough to draw every eye forward, every attention toward the stage. Evelyn felt the shift in her bones, the same way she used to feel the turning point in a negotiation before anyone else recognized it. The moment when everything that had been implied was about to become explicit. Around her, people straightened, conversations stilled, glasses paused halfway to lips as the room collectively held its breath. Near the front, a woman whispered, "This must be the expansion announcement." Her tone edged with excitement, and the man beside her nodded, already convinced of what he was about to witness. Nathaniel stepped slightly to the side, extending a hand toward the screen. As if presenting something already his, already decided, his posture relaxed but precise, every movement calibrated to reinforce the image he had spent years constructing. "We are entering a new chapter," he said, "one that will redefine not only our company, but our position in the industry." The words were bold, expansive, designed to impress, and they did, drawing a fresh wave of attention, a renewed sense of admiration from those who had come expecting to be impressed and found their expectations met. Evelyn did not react. Instead, her attention shifted briefly, not to the screen, not to Nathaniel, but to the edge of the stage where a man in a tailored dark suit stood just outside the main light, waiting. He held a slim folder in one hand, his posture composed, his presence understated in a way that would go unnoticed by most. But not by her. Recognition flickered, not as surprise, but as confirmation, and for a moment, the noise of the room seemed to recede even further, leaving only the quiet certainty that had been building all evening. Nathaniel turned back toward the audience, his expression open, assured, ready to deliver what he believed would be the defining moment of the night. And as we move forward, he said, it is important to recognize the leadership that has guided us here. A polite round of applause began to rise, premature but inevitable, the audience already responding to the promise of recognition, of names and titles that would reinforce the structure they believed in. Evelyn's gaze returned fully to the stage, her stillness unchanged, but beneath it, everything had aligned with a clarity that required no words. He was about to claim it. The future, the ownership, the entirety of something that had never truly been his alone. And just beyond the edge of the spotlight, the man with the folder took a single, measured step forward, waiting not for permission, but for the precise moment when interruption would no longer feel like disruption, but inevitability. Evelyn Carter did not move. She did not need to. Because for the first time that night, the stage was no longer entirely under Nathaniel Brooks's control, even if he had not realized it yet. The applause rose again, instinctive and eager, filling the space before the moment had even fully arrived, and Nathaniel Brooks accepted it with a slight incline of his head, his confidence unbroken, his belief in the story he was telling still absolute. He extended his hand toward the audience, a gesture meant to quiet them, to guide the room back into his rhythm, and they followed without hesitation, the sound tapering off into an expectant hush that belonged entirely to him. Before we conclude, he said, his voice smooth, controlled, there is one final announcement that represents everything we have worked toward. The words settled with weight, drawing every gaze forward, every thought aligned with the promise of something definitive, something that would seal the narrative he had been constructing all night. Behind him, the screen shifted again, the minimalist graphic dissolving into a clean title slide that hinted at ownership, leadership, legacy. It was all there, framed in language that suggested permanence, authority, control. Evelyn Carter watched it unfold with the same quiet stillness she had carried from the beginning, her breathing even, her posture unchanged, yet beneath that calm was a clarity that had sharpened into certainty. Around her, the energy shifted once more, anticipation giving way to admiration, as if the room had already decided what this moment would mean before it even happened. He is about to name himself, someone whispered nearby, the tone filled with approval rather than surprise, and another voice responded softly, of course he is. Who else would it be? The assumption moved through the crowd like a current, subtle but undeniable, reinforcing itself with every glance, every nod, every quiet agreement that required no confirmation. On stage, Nathaniel turned slightly, his hand gesturing toward the edge where the man with the folder now stepped fully into the light. The transition was seamless, rehearsed to the point of invisibility, as if this had always been part of the plan, as if nothing about this moment could possibly deviate from expectation. The man paused beside him, offering a brief nod, then opened the folder with deliberate precision, the sound of paper barely audible but somehow distinct in the quiet that had settled over the room. Evelyn's gaze locked onto that movement, not with curiosity, but with recognition, her focus narrowing to the smallest details, the way it always had when something important was about to be revealed. Nathaniel smiled, a controlled, satisfied expression, and took a small step back, positioning himself just slightly behind the man as if to allow the announcement to unfold while still remaining at its center. Please, he said, his tone gracious, inviting, go ahead. The man glanced down at the document, then out at the audience, his expression composed, professional, untouched by the anticipation that seemed to press in from every direction. As of this evening, he began, his voice clear, measured, The official designation of majority ownership and controlling interest within Brooks Global Holdings will be formally recognized. A ripple moved through the crowd, subtle but immediate, the weight of those words landing exactly as intended, confirming everything they believed they were about to hear. Evelyn did not blink. She did not shift. She simply listened, her stillness now carrying a quiet gravity of its own, something that existed outside the noise, outside the expectation, outside the version of reality the room had already accepted. Nathaniel's gaze swept briefly across the audience, confident, assured, already absorbing the reaction he anticipated, already stepping into a role he believed had always been his. And then, just as the moment reached its peak, just as certainty settled into place like something permanent, the man with the folder continued, his voice unchanged, his tone steady, as if what came next was not a disruption, but the natural completion of a truth that had always existed. Evelyn Carter did not move, because she did not need to. The story was no longer his to control. Evelyn Carter. The name did not arrive loudly, yet it cut through the room with a clarity that silenced everything it touched, as if the air itself had been waiting for it, as if the truth had simply stepped forward and spoken in its own voice. For a fraction of a second, no one moved. No one reacted. The moment hung there, suspended, fragile, and absolute all at once. Nathaniel Brooks did not turn immediately, but something in his posture shifted, subtle yet unmistakable, the kind of shift that happens when certainty fractures just enough to let doubt in. The man with the folder continued without pause, his tone steady, unaffected by the sudden stillness that had overtaken the room. Evelyn Carter, as the registered majority stakeholder and legal owner of Brooks Global Holdings, effective under the original incorporation agreement and subsequent equity structure. The words were precise, deliberate, leaving no room for interpretation, no space for narrative, only fact. A murmur began, soft. At first, like the distant movement of wind through glass, then growing, spreading across the audience in uneven waves of confusion, disbelief, recalculation. That is not possible, someone whispered. Did he just say Evelyn Carter? Another voice followed, sharper, more certain. Heads turned, not toward the stage this time, but outward, searching, scanning, until attention shifted, almost instinctively, toward the back of the room where she stood. Evelyn did not step forward. She did not raise her hand or announce herself. She simply existed in that space, exactly as she had all night. But now the room saw her differently, as if visibility had been granted not by movement, but by truth. Nathaniel turned then, slowly, his gaze following the direction of the crowd, his expression controlled but no longer effortless. For the first time that evening, there was a pause in him that had not been rehearsed. His eyes found her across the distance, and for a moment, the room disappeared, the stage, the lights, the audience all fading into something irrelevant compared to the reality standing quietly in front of him. Evelyn met his gaze without hesitation, her expression calm, unguarded, untouched by the chaos beginning to ripple outward. She did not look triumphant. She did not look angry. She simply looked certain. On stage, the man closed the folder with a soft, final motion, as if the act itself marked the end of discussion, not the beginning. All documentation has been verified and filed, he added, his voice carrying just enough to anchor the moment in something official, something irreversible. Nathaniel's hand, still loosely at his side, tightened slightly, the smallest indication of a reaction that could not be fully concealed. Beside him, his wife's composure faltered for the briefest second, her gaze shifting between him and the audience, searching for a cue that did not come. The applause that had filled the room moments before was gone, replaced by a silence that felt heavier, more honest, stripped of performance. Evelyn took a single breath, steady and unhurried, her presence no longer hidden, no longer mistaken. She had not interrupted. She had not demanded attention. She had simply allowed the truth to arrive in its own time. And now, under the same lights that had once belonged to him, everything had changed. Because he had built the stage. He had shaped the story, but the ownership, the foundation beneath it all, had never been his to claim. Silence did not break all at once. It fractured, uneven and hesitant, like a room relearning how to breathe after holding it for too long. and Evelyn Carter felt the shift ripple outward from the stage, moving through the crowd in subtle, unmistakable waves. Eyes that had once skimmed past her now settled, lingered, recalculated, as if the same woman standing in the same place had somehow become someone entirely different without taking a single step. Nathaniel Brooks remained where he was, but the space around him had changed, the certainty that once filled it now thinning, replaced by something quieter, more fragile, something that did not belong on a stage built for control. He looked at her again, longer this time, as if searching for a version of her that matched the story he had told, and finding none. Evelyn did not offer him one. She simply held his gaze, steady and unflinching, not as a challenge, not as a victory, but as recognition, as if this moment had always been inevitable and she had simply arrived on time. A voice near the front broke the silence, low but clear enough to carry. "How is that possible?" Another followed, sharper, more incredulous. "She was never listed." The confusion spread, questions layering over one another, each one exposing the same underlying realization that something fundamental had been misunderstood. On stage, Nathaniel exhaled slowly, the movement controlled but no longer effortless, his mind working through possibilities, explanations, anything that could restore the structure he had relied on. "There must be some mistake," he said finally, his voice measured, composed, but missing the ease it once carried. The words landed, but they did not settle, not the way his words had earlier, not with certainty, not with authority. The man with the folder did not react immediately, his posture unchanged, his expression neutral in a way that suggested he had anticipated this exact response. "There is no error," he replied calmly, his tone steady, grounded in something that did not require belief, only acknowledgement. "The original incorporation documents and subsequent equity allocations have been reviewed and validated. Miss Carter has held controlling interest from the beginning." From the beginning. The phrase moved through the room like a quiet shock, reshaping everything it touched, forcing each person present to revisit what they thought. They knew, what they thought they had seen. Evelyn felt the weight of it settle, not heavily, not overwhelmingly, but with a clarity that was almost freeing. She had not gained anything in this moment. She had not taken anything from him. She had simply been revealed as what she had always been. Nathaniel's gaze sharpened, the calculation returning, but now it was different, no longer rooted in control, but in recovery, in trying to understand how something so central could have remained outside his grasp. "That is not how this was structured," he said, quieter now, more to himself than to the room, as if repeating it might make it true. Evelyn took a step forward then, not toward the stage, not yet, but enough to shift her presence from the edges into something undeniable. The movement was small, almost insignificant, but the room felt it, attention following her not because she demanded it, but because it could no longer ignore her. She did not rush. She did not hesitate. Each step was measured, grounded, the kind of movement that carried no uncertainty. She stopped where the light began to touch her, not fully illuminated, not yet, but no longer hidden. Her voice, when it came, was calm, even, carrying just enough to reach him without needing to rise above the room. "It was exactly how it was structured," she said, her tone neither confrontational nor soft, simply true. The words did not echo. They did not need to. Because for the first time that night, the story was no longer being told by the man on the stage. It was being corrected by the woman he had forgotten. The room did not return to its previous rhythm. It shifted into something unfamiliar, something unsteady, as if every person present had been forced to reconsider not just what they had heard, but what they had believed long before this moment. Evelyn Carter stood at the edge of the light, her presence no longer peripheral, no longer optional, and the distance between her and the stage felt smaller now, not in feet or inches, but in truth. Nathaniel Brooks remained still, his posture held together by habit more than certainty, his mind moving quickly behind an expression that struggled to remain composed. He had built entire negotiations on less information than this, had redirected conversations, restructured outcomes, but this was different. This was not a negotiation. This was a foundation he had never fully seen. "You are suggesting," he said carefully, each word placed with intention, that this entire time he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. The implication hung there, incomplete but understood, and for the first time, it did not belong to him. Evelyn took another step forward, just enough for the light to fully reach her, revealing not a transformation, not a reinvention, but a clarity that had always been there, simply unnoticed. "I am not suggesting anything," she replied, her voice calm, grounded, carrying without effort. "I am stating what was already signed, already filed, and already in place." The distinction settled between them, sharp and clean, separating assumption from fact, narrative from structure. A few people in the audience exchanged glances, their earlier confidence replaced by something more cautious, more observant, as if they were now watching a different kind of performance, one that did not rely on applause to validate itself. On stage, Nathaniel shifted slightly, the movement subtle but revealing, a man recalibrating in real time, searching for ground that no longer felt stable. "That is not how this company has operated," he said, his tone firmer now, reaching for authority, for familiarity, for anything that could re-establish control. Evelyn's expression did not change. "No," she said simply. "That is how you chose to operate within it." The words were not loud, not forceful, but they carried a weight that did not need emphasis, because they were not designed to persuade, only to clarify. The distinction landed, and this time, the room felt it fully. The man with the folder remained where he was, silent now, his role complete, his presence no longer necessary for the truth to stand on its own. Near the front, someone leaned forward, their voice low but intent. "If she has controlling interest, then every decision." The sentence trailed off, but the realization did not. It spread, quiet but undeniable, touching every assumption that had shaped the evening. Nathaniel's gaze flickered briefly toward the screen behind him, the images of expansion and success now feeling less like proof and more like presentation, something built on a structure he had not fully owned. He looked back at Evelyn, this time not searching for the past, but trying to understand the present. "Why now?" he asked, the question slipping through before it could be refined, stripped of performance, stripped of strategy, leaving only something direct, almost human. Evelyn held his gaze, her answer immediate, unhesitating. "Because you decided to make it public." The simplicity of it left no room for interpretation, no space for argument. This moment was not created by her. It was revealed because he had chosen the stage, the audience, the spotlight. And now, standing in the same light he had claimed as his own, she did not need to take anything from him. She only needed to stand where she had always belonged. The question did not echo, but it lingered, suspended in the space between them, reshaping the air in a way that no applause ever could, and Evelyn Carter felt the weight of it not as pressure, but as confirmation, the final thread pulling everything into alignment. Around them, the room had shifted entirely, no longer an audience waiting to be impressed, but witnesses recalibrating their understanding in real time, their attention no longer fixed on performance, but on truth. Nathaniel Brooks stood at the center of it still, but the position felt different now, less like control and more like exposure, as if the very spotlight he had commanded had turned into something that revealed rather than protected. He exhaled slowly, his composure not gone, but altered, the edges of certainty softened by something he could not immediately reorganize. "You could have said something sooner," he added, quieter this time, the words less strategic, more searching, as if trying to locate a version of the past that made this moment make sense. Evelyn did not look away. She did not step closer to the stage, nor did she retreat. She remained exactly where she was, her presence steady, her voice calm when she answered. "You never asked," she said. The simplicity of it settled deeper than anything else that had been spoken that night. Not sharp, not accusatory, but undeniable in a way that required no further explanation. A subtle reaction moved through the room, not loud, not dramatic, but present, a collective recognition of something that extended beyond contracts and ownership, something rooted in attention, in omission, in the quiet decisions that shape entire outcomes. Nathaniel's gaze held hers, longer now, as if measuring the distance between what he had believed and what had always been true, and, for a moment, the calculation fell away entirely, leaving something more human, something unguarded. He glanced briefly toward the screen behind him, The carefully curated images now paused, frozen in a narrative that no longer held the same authority, then back to Evelyn, as if trying to reconcile two versions of the same story that no longer aligned. This company, he said, slower, more deliberate, was built on decisions I made. The statement was not as strong as it once would have been, not as absolute, but it carried the weight of his identity, of everything he had constructed around that belief. Evelyn listened, not interrupting, not dismissing, allowing the words to exist exactly as they were. And I never denied that, she replied, her tone even, grounded. But decisions and ownership are not the same thing. The distinction landed cleanly, cutting through the last layer of assumption that had held the room together. Near the front, someone leaned back slightly, absorbing it, while another lowered their gaze, as if re-examining something they had accepted without question. The shift was quiet, but complete. Nathaniel's hand moved slightly, an unconscious gesture, as if reaching for something familiar that was no longer there, and for the first time, he did not immediately recover it. His wife remained beside him, composed but distant, her earlier certainty replaced by a stillness that mirrored the room itself. Evelyn took a slow breath, not out of necessity, but out of awareness, of presence, of the exact moment they were standing in. She had not raised her voice. She had not forced the truth forward. She had simply allowed it to surface, and now it stood on its own, requiring nothing from her except acknowledgement. The silence that followed was no longer uncertain. It was clear, because what had been revealed could not be undone, and what had been misunderstood could no longer return to the shadows. And in that quiet, undeniable space, the balance of everything had already shifted. The silence did not feel empty anymore. It felt decisive, as if the room itself had crossed an invisible line and could not return to what it had been only minutes before, and Evelyn Carter stood within that shift with a quiet certainty that required no reinforcement. The stage lights still burned with the same golden intensity, but they no longer belonged to a performance, they illuminated something real, something that had not been scripted, and for the first time that evening, Nathaniel Brooks stood within them, without control over what they revealed. His gaze remained on Evelyn, but the calculation behind it had changed, no longer searching for a way to reshape the moment, but trying to understand the structure beneath it, the part he had never fully seen. Around them, the audience had settled into a different kind of stillness, one that was attentive rather than reactive, as if every person present had instinctively recognized that what came next would not be applause, but consequence. Nathaniel straightened slightly, the instinct to regain composure returning, not out of habit this time, but necessity, and when he spoke again, his voice carried less performance and more intention. If that is the case, he said, measured, deliberate, then why remain silent for so long? The question was not sharp, not defensive, but it carried something deeper, something closer to understanding than accusation. Evelyn met it without hesitation, her expression unchanged, her presence grounded in something that did not need to rise or fall with the room. Because the structure did not require noise to exist, she replied, her tone even, steady, each word placed with quiet precision. And I did not need to prove ownership to someone who was already operating inside it. The distinction settled with clarity, drawing a subtle shift through the audience as the meaning expanded beyond the surface of the conversation. Nathaniel absorbed it, not immediately responding, the weight of it requiring more than a reflexive answer. His eyes moved briefly across the room, taking in the faces that now watched him differently, not with admiration alone, but with a kind of curiosity that had not been there before, a reassessment unfolding in real time. He turned back to Evelyn, slower now, more deliberate, as if recognizing that this moment was no longer something to control, but something to move through. And now, he asked. The question was simple, but it carried the weight of everything that had shifted, everything that had been revealed, everything that could no longer return to what it had been. Evelyn allowed a brief pause, not for effect, but for clarity, the kind that ensured her words would not be mistaken for anything else. Now, she said, it becomes visible. The room seemed to absorb that, the simplicity of it cutting through the complexity of everything that had led to this point. Visibility. Not change. Not takeover. Not confrontation. just recognition of what had always been in place. Near the stage, the man with the folder stepped back, his role fully complete, leaving the space between them unobstructed, no longer mediated by documents or declarations, only by truth. Nathaniel's shoulders eased slightly, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement, the kind that does not come from losing something, but from realizing it was never held in the way he believed. His wife remained still beside him, her presence quieter now, no longer central to the moment, but not dismissed, simply repositioned within a reality that had shifted around her. Evelyn did not move closer. She did not claim the stage. She did not need to, because the balance had already changed, not through force, not through spectacle, but through something far more absolute. And as the light continued to fall evenly across them both, it no longer highlighted a single narrative. It revealed the truth that had been there all along, waiting not to be created, but to be seen. The room no longer felt like a place waiting for direction. It had become something else entirely, a space suspended between what had been assumed and what had now been undeniably revealed, and Evelyn Carter stood within that space without needing to move, without needing to claim anything beyond what already belonged to her. The light settled evenly across the stage and the floor, no longer favoring one over the other, and for the first time that evening, there was no clear center, no single point of control, only a shared awareness that could not be reversed. Nathaniel Brooks remained where he was, but the distance between who he had been at the start of the night and who he stood as now was no longer something that could be measured in confidence or perception. It was something deeper, something structural. His gaze shifted briefly, not away from Evelyn, but across the room, taking in the subtle recalibration in the faces around him, the way admiration had quieted into observation, the way certainty had given way to understanding. He turned back to her, slower now, not as a man addressing an audience, but as someone facing a reality that no longer needed interpretation. "You never intended to step forward," he said, not as a question, but as a realization forming in real time. Evelyn held his gaze, her expression unchanged, her voice calm when she answered. "I never needed to," she replied. The words did not carry force, but they carried truth, and in that moment, it was enough. A subtle shift moved through the audience again, not loud, not disruptive, but present, as if the final piece of something larger had settled into place. Near the front, someone exhaled softly, the sound almost imperceptible, but it marked the release of tension that had been building since the first name was spoken. Nathaniel absorbed her answer without interruption, his posture easing slightly, not in surrender, but in acceptance, the kind that does not come from defeat, but from clarity. He glanced once more toward the screen behind him, now paused on an image that no longer held meaning in the way it had moments before, then back to Evelyn, his expression steadier, more grounded. "Then this changes everything," he said quietly. Evelyn did not respond immediately. She allowed the statement to exist, to settle, to be understood for what it was and what it was not. When she spoke, her tone remained even, precise. "No," she said. "It only changes what is visible." The distinction was subtle, but it carried a weight that reshaped the moment entirely. Around them, the room seemed to understand it, the realization moving not through words, but through recognition, as if each person present had reached the same conclusion at the same time. Nothing had been taken, nothing had been altered, only revealed. Nathaniel's shoulders lowered slightly, the tension that had held him in place loosening, not because the situation had resolved, but because it had clarified. His wife remained beside him, her earlier composure now quieter, her presence no longer central to the narrative, but not erased, simply repositioned within a reality that no longer revolved around her. Evelyn stood where she was, her stillness no longer mistaken for absence, but understood as control, the kind that does not require movement to be felt. She had not interrupted the night. She had not dismantled anything. She had simply allowed the truth to arrive at the exact moment it could no longer be ignored. And as the silence settled once more, it was no longer uncertain. It was complete, because the story had not been rewritten. It had been corrected, and in that correction, everything else had quietly, irrevocably, fallen into place. The room did not erupt. It did not collapse into chaos or noise, Instead, it settled into something far more powerful, a quiet, collective acknowledgement that no one had prepared for, and Evelyn Carter felt it in the stillness, in the way every glance now carried intention instead of assumption. The stage remained exactly as it had been, the lights unchanged, the screen still frozen on a version of success that no longer told the full story, but everything within that space had shifted in meaning, in weight, in truth. Nathaniel Brooks stood there, no longer performing, no longer directing, but present in a way that was unfamiliar even to himself, as if the absence of control had revealed something he had not needed to face before. His gaze remained steady, not on the audience, not on the screen, but on Evelyn, and for the first time, there was no attempt to reshape what stood between them. Only recognition. Around them, the audience did not speak, not because they had nothing to say, but because they understood that words would diminish what had already been made clear. A woman near the center lowered her glass slowly, her expression thoughtful rather than shocked, while a man beside her nodded almost imperceptibly, as if confirming something he had only just realized. The shift was complete, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. Evelyn took a small step forward, not toward the spotlight, but into it, allowing the light to settle fully across her without resistance. Without hesitation, her presence now aligned with what had already been revealed. She did not rush. She did not claim the stage with urgency. She simply occupied the space that had always been hers, her posture relaxed, her expression calm, her voice carrying naturally when she spoke again. "There is nothing to take," she said, her tone even, steady, reaching the room without force. "There never was." The words settled softly, but their impact was immediate, reframing everything not as loss, not as conflict, but as correction. Nathaniel listened without interruption, his stance no longer defensive, no longer structured around maintaining an image, but open in a way that did not require agreement, only understanding. He exhaled slowly, the movement subtle, almost imperceptible, as if releasing something he had been holding. Without realizing it, his wife remained beside him, composed but quiet, her earlier presence now receding into the background of a moment that no longer revolved around appearances, but around truth. The man with the folder had already stepped back completely, his role finished, leaving nothing between what had been declared and what now existed openly in the room. Evelyn's gaze moved briefly across the audience, not seeking validation, not measuring reaction, but acknowledging the space itself, the people within it, the moment they had all become part of. She did not smile. She did not harden. She simply remained as she was, grounded, certain, complete without needing to prove it. Nathaniel followed her gaze for a brief second, seeing the same room he had commanded earlier, now changed not in structure, but in perception, and when his attention returned to her, there was no resistance left in it. Only clarity. The silence that followed was no longer waiting for something to happen. It had already happened, because the balance had not shifted through confrontation or spectacle, but through something quieter, something more absolute. The truth had not arrived with force. It had arrived with precision. And now, standing under the same light that once belonged to a different story, Evelyn Carter did not need to say anything more. She had not taken the stage. She had simply revealed that it had always been hers. The light did not change, the room did not shift again, and yet something within it had settled into a final, unspoken understanding that no announcement could have achieved, and Evelyn Carter stood at the center of that quiet resolution, without claiming it, without needing to define it. The chandeliers above still cast their steady glow, the stage remained polished and untouched, but the meaning of everything within that space had been irrevocably rewritten, not by force, not by spectacle, but by the simple, undeniable presence of truth. Nathaniel Brooks no longer attempted to reclaim the moment, no longer searched for words that could reshape what had already been made clear, and as he looked at Evelyn now, there was no trace of performance left in his expression, only a measured, quiet acknowledgement of something he could not undo. The audience remained still, not out of discomfort, but out of recognition, as if each person present understood they had witnessed something that did not require applause, did not benefit from noise, something that existed more powerfully in silence than it ever could in sound. Evelyn let her gaze move once more across the room, not seeking validation, not measuring impact, but simply acknowledging the space that had once overlooked her and now could not. She did not linger in that recognition. She did not absorb it as victory. She simply accepted it as alignment. Her attention returned briefly to Nathaniel, and in that shared moment, there was no hostility, no triumph, only clarity, the kind that exists when illusion has fully dissolved and nothing remains but what is real. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, not as a concession, not as defeat, but as understanding, and it was enough. Evelyn did not respond with a gesture. She did not need to. Instead, she turned, not abruptly, not dramatically, but with the same quiet control she had carried from the beginning, and began to move away from the stage, her steps measured, unhurried, each one grounded in certainty rather than reaction. The room watched her, not because she demanded attention, but because they could no longer look away, not from her, but from what she represented, a presence that had never needed to be loud to be powerful. As she passed through the space, the subtle sounds of the evening began to return, the faint clink of glass, the soft shift of fabric, but none of it carried the same meaning as before. It was no longer a room waiting to be impressed. It was a room that had already seen what mattered. Near the exit, Evelyn paused for the briefest moment, not to look back, not to revisit what had already been resolved, but simply to exist in the stillness of a moment that required nothing more from her. Then she stepped forward and continued, disappearing not into shadow, but into a future that no longer needed to be proven. Behind her, the stage remained, the lights still shining, the narrative forever altered. Nathaniel Brooks stood where he was, no longer the center, no longer the author of the story he had once controlled, but a part of something larger than himself, something that had always existed beyond his understanding. And in the quiet that followed, one truth remained, steady and complete. She had never come back to take anything. She had simply never left.